In service design, we want to be sure that our services meet the needs of the business, and we will see this phrase over and over again when we talk about all of the processes within service design. We need to meet the needs of the business. We don't necessarily want to exceed the needs of the business because we may be providing excess service or excess quality that for which the business is not prepared to or might be unwilling to pay for. But we certainly want to meet the needs of the business. The processes that we will cover and review here include availability management, capacity management, continuity management, security management, service level management, service catalog management, supplier management, and new in 2011, design coordination, which we will touch on briefly. So before we get into the actual design, there are certain considerations for IT managers, and those considerations are listed here. People, processes, products, and partners. So we need to understand again from the capability and resource standpoint, who are the people involved, both on the business or customer side as well as on the IT side, the delivery side. We want to understand what processes are currently in place, what the products or technology we have, and we also want to be working with our partners or suppliers and understand who those partners are and what they have to offer. Beyond those four aspects of service design, the four considerations of service design, we look at then the 5 aspects of design. So the 5 aspects of the design include technology and architecture, the service portfolio, which I have outlined here on the right of the screen, our service solution, processes, and metrics. So the technology and architecture, I would argue, is the aspect that IT is most comfortable with. So the actual hardware, software, the nuts and bolts, that's where IT typically will focus when designing a new service. But there are several other components here that are equally as important. We want to focus on the portfolio or the structures that help us to document the service. The solution or requirements themselves is an important component of the design. And then the last 2 especially, processes and metrics. When we are designing a service, we need to understand what processes will need to be designed along with it. So when I'm designing a new or changed email service, for example, I want to understand what are the processes going to be for support and delivery of this service. So how is this going to be requested? How is it going to be fulfilled? How is this going to be deployed? How is this going to be managed from an incident management standpoint? So when there are issues with this service, who is going to respond? How are we going to troubleshoot issues related to the service, and so on? All of these components or aspects should be incorporated as part of our overall design. And then metrics as well. We want to understand, how do we determine whether we are successful at delivering this service? We can only identify that by having the appropriate metrics in place. So those were the 5 aspects of our design. We'll now get into the actual processes that take us through service design. So the first process I'll introduce here is service level management. Most people are familiar with service level management, or at least with service level agreements. And there is some guidance that I provide to our customers when talking about service level management. Often IT organizations will have what I call secret service level agreements, meaning that they have really what amount to service level targets that they've identified, but that they haven't necessarily negotiated with their customer. If you are at a point where you are prepared to go in front of your customer, however, and negotiate a true service level agreement, it's important, I think, to come to the table with two things. First, you want to understand your current capabilities. That's extremely important. You have to establish these targets before you present them to the business. You can't just be taking a shot in the dark. So, for example, you want to understand things like, how long does it currently take me to resolve an incident related to this specific service? So you need to have those metrics in place and understood prior to entering into negotiations. And the second component is actually obtaining agreement from the business and understanding what their requirements are. So before even, ideally you want to understand from them what their needs are prior to laying out what your capabilities are. So it's a fine dance that you do. It is certainly, when you're talking about having the appropriate resource assigned to be your service level manager, it's often defined as being a spy in two camps. So you're trying to negotiate or balance the needs of the business with the resources and capabilities available from IT. So you certainly don't want to go in with a high level of capability if that is not going to be matched by the needs of the business. You want to be able to manage the way that you deliver a particular service or support. So if the needs of the business for a particular service are fairly low, even if you can exceed the needs of the business, again, it's all about how do we balance our resources. If the needs of the business are not significant for a particular service, then the support should be provided appropriately. Maybe reallocate staff members. If the business indicates that a particular service isn't as important, then you can reallocate resources from that service to another service that might be more important to the business. So I list here the fact that service level agreements, or the agreements that we have with the business, are supported by operational level agreements and underpinning contracts. And on our next slide, I'll illustrate a little bit more about what that means. So we define our underpinning contracts and our operational level agreements to support our service level agreements. What that means is that if we have agreements within IT, so operational level agreements are agreements that, for example, the service desk would have with Tier 2 support. So we have that as a factor when determining how we're going to provide service to our customer. We also need to keep in mind support we receive from external suppliers. Those are our underpinning contracts. So if, for example, we are committed to providing service to our customer or a fix to our customer for an issue within 8 hours, then we need to be sure that our operational level agreements and our underpinning contracts specify a time frame less than 8 hours so we can be sure that we can meet our service level agreement. If we have an agreement with our supplier, for example, that we allow them up to 3 days to provide resolution to an issue, that's not compatible with having a service level agreement to our customer of a 1-day fixed time, for example, or 1-day mean time to restore service. There are many types of SLAs, so you can specify, for example, based on a specific service. So I mentioned the business may decide to identify a particular service. So for a hospital, for example, that might be a patient record management system, which is much more critical than, say, office productivity software like Microsoft Word. So you may have higher levels of service required based on the type of service it is that you're providing. You may also have customer-based SLAs. Again, going back to the example of working in a hospital or medical care environment, you may have higher levels of support for patient-facing individuals, so doctors and nurses, than, for example, you might have for your back office people. There may be some corporate-wide SLAs, so you may have some a baseline SLA, for example. So what are your baseline expectations, unless spelled out or specified otherwise? And then you might have service levels that are multi-level, meaning based on a combination of service and customer. So if it's again, going back to my previous examples, if it's a doctor or nurse calling about the patient management system, then that may be a higher priority than a back office person calling about the same software. The types of SLAs that we see most often, I would say, are the service-based and the corporate types of SLAs. Going beyond service level management, I mentioned underpinning contracts, and underpinning contracts are actually part of the process called supplier management. Supplier management has been getting a lot of attention lately because I would say it has as its definition a process that can help us obtain value for the money or cost of services that we receive from our suppliers. So any process that promises to obtain value for money that we're spending is certainly going to get attention in more challenging economic times. It's important as part of supplier management to maintain supplier and contracts in a supplier and contracts database. This is identified as being part of an overall configuration management system or configuration management database, a CMDB. So it's helpful if we can identify not just the supplier and contracts, but what are the components or systems that are governed by these contracts or underpinning contracts. So certainly we can see how this too is an important part of our overall service design by working with and obtaining services from our suppliers for the design of our services. We mentioned that the service portfolio is one of the aspects of service design, and specifically service catalog management. As we go through the service lifecycle, we identify requirements, we do the appropriate analysis. Once the service is approved, it then becomes part of the service catalog. And specifically, when the team is chartered or formed to actually conduct the design phase, that's when a service is defined as being part of the service catalog. So in the service catalog, the team is chartered, we design and develop the service, we then move through transition into final operation. The service catalog is additionally defined as being the customer viewable section of the service portfolio. So we have a lot of organizations currently working to define their service catalogs, looking at the new and existing services and seeing how they fit into the overall catalog of services that they provide to their customers. There are two aspects or components of the service catalog. There is the business service catalog, which is viewed by the customer, and then there is a technical service catalog. The technical service catalog typically catalogs the systems that support the business services. So the business service might be a patient records management system, which is underpinned by the technical services of applications, databases, servers, the network, and so on.